webinars this year on sustainability and lighting. Now, today's event is organised by Recolight, the UK's leading compliance body for the waste, electrical and electronic equipment regulations. I'm Ray Molony and I'm the head of content at the Build Back Better Awards, and I'm going to be a host for the next hour and a half or so. Now, today we're discussing how to design sustainable luminaires. We have an excellent lineup of speakers as always, as you can see. Now, our panel today are John Gorse, who's Technical Solutions Manager at Signify. We also have John Bullock, who's a publisher and editor at The Light Review. Zoltan Pilter, who's a product regulatory compliance leader at Tungsram Group, and he's in the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. From Canada, from Toronto, we have Michael Colligan. He's a host of Get a Grip on Lighting and the Starving for Darkness podcast. And he's also president of Waste Diversion, which is a lamp recycling company there in also in Toronto. We also have Ruth Kelly Waskett. She's a senior associate lighting designer at Hoare. She's president of the Society of Light and Lighting, and she's also an expert judge in the Build Back Better Awards in the lighting category. We have Simon Fisher, the well-known luminaire designer and founder and director of FMark. And finally, last but not least, we have Nigel Harvey, who's the CEO of Recolight, and he's joining us on the panel as well. Okay, let's look at today's agenda. Simon is going to kick us off with how to design a luminaire for the circular economy. He'll be sharing his experience of working with lighting manufacturers both here and across Europe. And John Bullock will be giving us an update on BS 8887, which is the standard driving compliance requirements for the reuse and remanufacture of light fittings. Now, following those presentations, we're going to get into a discussion with the full panel on all the issues and all the challenges and opportunities that this throws up. But before that, just some housekeeping. I'm sure you all know all this stuff by now, but first, today is one of a series of webinars on this topic. This is number 6. Now, if you missed any of the ones earlier this year on extending the life of luminaires, specifically on legislation for lighting, the return of the replaceable lamp, how to go net zero, and the specifiers role in all of this and the circular economy, you can listen to a replay on the Recolight website. So simply go to recolight.co.uk and follow the links. You can fast forward and you can stop and you can go to a specific speaker should you wish to do so. Today's session is, oh yes, also in December, we will announce some of the themes and the topics for the series of webinars in 2022. So keep an eye out for those on the usual channels. Now, today's session is being recorded and it will in due course appear on the Recolight website, so you can listen again. The webinar will be an hour and a half. We'll finish at 12:30 p.m. Please put your questions in the questions box and your chat in the chat box. And I say this because I'm going to only be looking at the questions during the event, but my colleague Suzanne is taking care of the chat. So if you have any sort of issues or like technical issues or other issues, please put them in there and Suzanne will do her best to assist you. So hope that's all clear. Now, I usually start these webinars with some news of sustainable circular lighting from around the industry. Today's no exception. So I suppose the big news is, Lighting Industry Association has published its first technical statement on the circular economy and how it relates to lighting. So the organization is basically addressing this issue and bringing it to the attention of their manufacturers. This document is called TS41, and it's essentially a guidance document that looks at the challenges ahead for manufacturers and in areas such as remanufacturing, etc. Now, the document is free to members and available on the LIA website. BSI has introduced a couple of new kite marks, one for certified remanufacturers and one for certified reconditioners. Now, it's all part of BS 8887, which John Bullock is going to tell us all about in a minute. And as you can see, Whitecroft is one of the first manufacturers off the blocks with the new logo. It has become a certified reconditioner of light fittings, which means that it returns a used luminaire to a satisfactory working condition, according to BS 8887, by rebuilding or repairing major components that are close to failure, even where there's no reported faults in any of those components. So congratulations to Whitecroft. In product news, the Helsinki company Luolight has developed a modular lighting system made of bamboo, which is a very sustainable material. As you know, it consists of curved and straight elements that can be combined in any order to create lines or circles or combination of both. And you can get those with diffusers and lens optics in black and natural bamboo. Dialight has introduced a version of its Vigilant High Bay light for retail and warehouses, which breaks the 200 lumens per luminaire watt barrier for the first time. This 96 watt light delivers 19,100 lumens in a color temperature of either 4,000 K or 5,000 K. And if you said 10 years ago that some of these products would be on the market, it'd be pretty amazing. And finally, Hazel Lighting has become the latest manufacturer to announce that it's going carbon neutral this year. It's already rolled out a number of measures. It has moved to partly recycled packaging. The company vehicles are either electric or hybrid, while the company's electricity is all from renewables and their use of gas is offset. And before Nigel Harvey points it out, as he does, it's worth restating that carbon neutrality is balancing your emissions with offsetting to remove an equivalent amount of carbon by, for instance, planting trees, whereas the more onerous net zero is attempting to eliminate the carbon production in the first place. And then if you have anything you can't physically offset, then anything you can't physically eliminate, then you offset it. So that's the difference between those the two phrases that get bandied around an awful lot. Okay, right on to the business at hand. So I'm going to hand over to the capable hands of Simon, who's going to tell us about how we design luminaires for the circular economy. Simon.
Awesome. Thank you, Ray. Good morning, everybody. It's a real privilege to kick this session off today. I think that with the 10 or 15 minutes I've got to say a few words, we're not going to cover this topic in great detail. And actually, I'm very excited to actually get towards the panel discussion towards the latter half of this webinar. But I'm going to say a few words this morning about how we design, or how I've designed for the circular economy, and some of the considerations that I've made as a product design consultant to this industry. I think we've begun to get a very clear understanding, on next slide, please, Suzanne. We've begun to get a very clear understanding through this webinar program and in press generally that recycling should be our last option, and I think everyone is beginning to understand that and beginning to get their head around the fact that this should be the last thing we do. As a result of that, we're now having to consider the design of our fixtures and the design of our fixtures for multiple life scenarios, and move away from lighting being a single-use industry, basically. So next slide, please, Suzanne. So, industry is, and the people, the lawmakers of our industry are helping us to define and helping to drive this kind of change, and the change in mindset and the change in thinking. Again, hopefully most on the call will be aware of Ecodesign guidelines. We will certainly be talking about this more in the panel discussion, but the process of considering fixtures with Ecodesign in mind is certainly looking at changing existing fixtures and understanding what is possible with regards to reuse and remanufacture. But as we look forward and future product designs, this is going to be the template by which we design fixtures in the future. Next slide, please. So anything that is not natural in this world, has been designed. And it's fair then to assume that product design or design in general is at the heart of the circular economy process. And it's interesting to look at, whilst Ecodesign is helping us really understand the third column here and looking at design for recovery, and that's where we look at how we can repair, how we can refurbish, how we can remanufacture products. It's well worth noting at this point that designing a product to kind of delay obsolescence, and looking at how we extend product use is a very valid design consideration, and particularly long use, designing a product for long use. If you look at industry, examples of industry like the heavier industries, oil and gas, and kind of industries where access is particularly difficult, then designing for a really, designing for durability and designing for ultra long service is also a very positive consideration when you're considering the circular economy. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is just highlight 5 things really that at high level that we should be thinking about when we're designing lighting fixtures and lighting systems. And the first one really is what I've categorized as design smart. So if we create modularity and we create interoperability within lighting fixtures, then kind of by default, we're beginning to tackle the issues of multiple life and multiple use scenarios within fixtures. An example here is a range of products that we've designed where the light engine itself, the cob, the heatsink, and the optical arrangement is common and can be interchangeable within a whole host of carriers, including fixed and adjustable downlights, track spots, surface products, and pendants. Now, the great thing about that is that you're minimizing inventory, you're maximizing your potential, you're creating design consistency in lighting design because your performance, regardless of the carrier that it's in, will be consistent. And then you can begin to then integrate scenarios where you could introduce in the first instance, a relatively inert and dumb object, an on-off style scenario. But as we build in IoT and we build in smart capabilities, you've got the ability to interchange components to input smart, and then the products that we take out and replace, you can then apply circular economy principles to and make a decision whether actually the LED module should be reconditioned, should be repurposed, or actually, if it's significantly damaged, should go towards the recycling end of the market. The second point I want to raise is around material selection. I think most people probably understand that aluminium and steel are recyclable materials, and I think are quite widely recycled at the moment. A couple of points that are quite interesting to point out is plastic is a difficult one to crack, and I think there's a lot of work that we can do to make plastic more recyclable. At the moment, there's and Nigel may qualify this a little bit later, but at the moment, plastic is just treated as plastic, right? So there's no separate delineation between material types. And if we can get to a scenario where we define the use of materials at the point of manufacture and make that consistent. So for instance, all plastic is polycarbonate or all plastic is acrylic, then we stand a far better chance at the point at which we reuse that material to use that material in a far better way. If at the moment the recycling process is that all plastic goes in one big bucket, it's all ground up, and the potential for the reuse of the material that is produced as a result of that process is very limited. But when we consider, if we can get to a position where, for instance, all polycarbonate, we know that polycarbonate is all polycarbonate in a bucket, then we can then reintroduce that through a closed loop manufacturing process back into the supply chain and know that we've got a very good quality polycarbonate product that can be manufactured from 100% recycled material. And to a degree, the same goes for cardboard. If we have a plain brown packaging instead of heavily bleached or cardboard that is produced with lots of multiple colors of ink in the printing process, then actually the ability to break down and reuse that cardboard is far higher. Next slide, please. Linked to material selection is component quality. I don't think I need to explain these two slides in particularly, but making sure that the materials you select are fit for purpose. And there's a piece, you know, about the design process and making sure that the manufacturers are not forced to use inferior quality products. But there's also, it's a fair comment to put towards the design community to make sure that through the specification process of lighting, that actually they're aware of and therefore making sure that the products that are being specified are also fit for purpose, and we are avoiding the kind of scenarios after just a few months of installation that I'm sure that we have all seen at some point or another in a shopping centre or an office environment. Next slide, please. Avoiding paper use is a really interesting topic, and digitizing data, you know, will save a significant amount of paper. I actually opened a sample that I received earlier this week, and the light fixture was a tiny little recessed down light, and I would have suggested that 80% of the content of the box was actually the 7 or 8 pages that came, you know, with the light fixture in, you know, 20 different languages, telling me how to install the light fitting. So making it acceptable to issue digital data, making it acceptable to receive digital data is going to be quite critical to basically not chopping down trees. Next slide. Now, legislation is very important. The challenge, you know, in my 30-odd years in the industry is that legislation very often is a case of closing the door after the horse is bolted, and very often, you know, manufacturers and designers have very often made their own versions of or made their own decisions about what they're going to be doing before legislation comes along and kind of enforces it. But it's fair to say that embracing eco-design and embracing circularity will almost inevitably lead to the introduction of and the increase in complexity of product. A simple example of that is you know, making a light source interchangeable. Almost certainly will introduce a plug and socket arrangement of some description, which will add a few pennies, which will add to the overall cost of the product. So actually legislation in that scenario kind of legitimizes the increase in the relative increase in expense and hopefully will allow this process to happen in a very smooth way. And the last couple of slides I've got are really maybe just to continue to open the debate in the panel discussion that we have shortly. But and I've used this slide in a different context in previous webinars, but it struck me that you know, in Europe, you know, we produce 10 billion euros worth of stuff, and just to qualify, this slide is a 2018 slide, so kind of a pre-COVID slide. But you know, we produce 10 billion euros worth of stuff in Europe. We export, you know, about that amount, but we import about that amount as well. So it's an interesting, it's a very simplistic view to take, but what if we made everything in Europe and kept it in Europe, and everything that was outside Europe stayed outside Europe, and we didn't put it all on boats, and we didn't ship it halfway around the world, that would have a fairly significant impact on the environment and our carbon footprints. And it's a far more complex scenario than that, but it's an interesting observation to make. And finally, sort of putting together this presentation, it made me wonder why I got into this in the first place. And the slides you see on the screen here were a couple of images that that my family very kindly found and dug out for me. And these are images of my uncle's TV and radio repair shop. That as a young lad I used to go every Saturday, primarily because I got a glass of Lucozade when I got there. But in addition to that, I used to sit out the back there, and my uncle used to repair stuff. And this is a phenomenon. This is an industry that, over the course of the last couple of generations has died out. The shop in the high street, that when something is broken, you go in and somebody that's experienced and knowledgeable, take it apart and repair it and give it back to you. And the reason why I wanted to share that with you, number one is, we killed off this industry, and there's no reason why we can't reintroduce this industry as part of a circular economy drive. And it was really just to share with you that actually these experiences and my young life, taking apart transistor radios was the bit that led me to do what I do today. And I'm very proud of that and very grateful for it. So to summarize, what I've just been saying is actually embracing a circular economy is a huge topic, but if you take any small step, it's a step in the right direction. And we all have an obligation to do it. And I really look forward to sharing thoughts and views in the future. So thank you for your time. I am going to hand you now to John, who is going to standard BS 8887. Thank you.
Simon, thanks very much for that. Great handover, and love the image of the old TV and radio repair shop, because you're absolutely right. One on every street corner, please. I'm going to be talking about BS 8887, which was a new thing for me at the beginning of this year, although it has been around a little while. The conversation was around remanufacturing, and I think we all have to sort of doff our caps to Tom Ruddle at Egg Lighting up in Scotland on this one for putting so much energy into it to get us to where we are. Thank you, Suzanne. There is a working party out there who get together on a regular basis to see what we can do about remanufacturing of lighting specifically. Now, a little bit of background. BS 8887 has been around since 2006. The umbrella term is it's designed for manufacture, assembly, disassembly, and end-of-life processing, which gives you the really cute acronym of MADE. Who'd have thought? And since then, various parts and various elements of that have grown out, and Ray showed you what Whitecroft have currently signed up to. But we felt that we needed something that was specifically for lighting, and as you can see there around that table, we have got elements of all of the industry with us. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any detail, because this is still a work in progress. But just to give you an idea of where BS 8887 remanufacturing lighting is headed, Suzanne, could I have the next slide? This is the classic image of the circular economy, and the bit that is kind of the important bit is the bit right at the bottom, Suzanne. Yes, maximizing recycling, closing that old linear line of taking and making and wasting. But it served us well when all we were thinking about was, at the end of the day, when you are scrapping something, you don't chuck it on the tip. you do something with it. You reprocess it, you turn it into an aluminium billet or a slug of steel, whatever you do with it. But now we need to look a little bit more carefully, Suzanne. Recycling, as Simon said, you know, recycling is the last thing we want to do, because if we've got something and it's already there and it's already functioning, we need to think twice about what we do before we actually decide to bin it. Simon was really the work that Simon was doing there is talking about moving forward. Very much I realize that this is looking back. This is looking at the existing estate of lighting fixtures in every building you can imagine. And every one of those light fittings deserves an assessment as to whether it can be reused, whether it can be repaired and remanufactured, or whether indeed it has to be dumped. And in fact, even if you take a fitting and you only have to dump half of it, that means that you're holding on to another half. Why does it matter? It matters because every time we put something through a reprocessing plant, it costs energy. Every time we don't reuse something, it means that we are looking to use more new raw material, which has its own costs. And if we can avoid that, then that is all good news for all of us. So, Suzanne, here we are. We're moving from the old recycle, one word on a page, to can we reuse it? Can we remanufacture it? Can we recycle it? What BS, thank you, what BS 888 is looking at is how we might go through that process of remanufacture. Now, this one is when we first started talking about circular economy and some of the bigger manufacturers were talking about this particular model, the idea that you sell a load of light fittings into a building. You might do it as lighting as a service, but what you certainly do is you keep your fingerprints on those fittings, and at some point you go back into the building and you renovate them in some way. It's a direct relationship between the user and the manufacturer. The protocols are already in place, and at that point you're not really looking for any extension to any kind of legislation. This one that Suzanne's just flashed up is actually what probably happens more in practice, when you might get a manufacturer who is charged with taking some fittings away, maybe removing an old light source and putting a new light source in, and they don't do it themselves. They introduce a third party, and that third party does the work for them. But the contractual obligations between the end user and the manufacturer are still in place. And it's a separate contract between the manufacturer and the contracted remanufacturer. But as far as the end user is concerned, they're just dealing with that manufacturer. And again, you go, really, a new British standard for that? Why? Because, again, the protocols are in place. However, Suzanne, this is the one that we need to be looking at. We've shifted now. The user has got options. The user might want to go back and talk to the original manufacturer, but more likely, the end user goes to a third-party company and says, I've got these old light fittings. There must be something I can do with them. I don't really want to sort of strip them all out and put new stuff in. What can you do to help? Now, who is that person? Who is that independent remanufacturer? What standards are they working to? How do we know? What kind of assessment has been made on the quality of their business? And ultimately, just that little arrow that connects the original manufacturer to the independent manufacturer, we need confidence in that supply chain, that if someone is taking on the job of, I don't know, upgrading 1,000 light fittings, and they need replacement parts from an original manufacturer, that original manufacturer needs to know that they're dealing with someone who has got the appropriate chops to be able to do that work. Next slide, please, Suzanne. This is not necessarily a sexy business. We've been used to the idea of remanufacture at the moment because we know that those fittings are out there, and they all tend to be very, very nice, and you end up with them in a hipster dining room or wherever. But actually, thousands upon thousands of light fittings, all have got more life in them than they will currently receive if we do not enter some kind of remanufacturing. So here we've got commodity fixtures at the top there, old fluorescent bulkhead fittings, old Cat 1 and Cat 2 Hoare upon Hoare 3 and 4 by 18 watt T8 lamps, and square and circular LED panels. And that's a question as to whether they will ever be remanufactured. But I put it up there anyway. But no to the, sorry, Suzanne, could you just nip back one? Thank you. That bigger image, however, is not a commodity installation. That's a tartan grid ceiling. And those of us who've been around long enough will remember the horrors of the tartan grid in the 80s and 90s. Those are not standard fittings. They've all been manufactured to do a particular job, to fit into a particular ceiling. And the idea that you have to remove those because they're old, sad and tired and put a new fitting in fills some people with horror. But if you can drop those fittings out and you can refit them with appropriate LEDs, you can perhaps reconfigure the optics to something which is actually more suitable to what we're looking at for the commercial environment today, then that is good for us. Suzanne, thanks. So, BS 8887 remanufacturing bracket lighting, closed brackets, or whatever we end up calling it, is still in the formative process. We're not there yet, but that is kind of where we're trying to go. Next slide, please. It will be about process. It will not be about the product. It will not be a case of hanging a BSI badge on a light fitting and say, we did this to BSI 8887. The companies involved will be accredited. That is how it has to work. And again, the next one, Suzanne. And the other thing, which is all important, we have to maintain product compliance. Just because it's a second-hand fixture, hey, who buys second-hand motor cars? I do. Do I expect it to work? Well, I certainly do. And we've got MOT certificates to prove it. When we put light fittings onto the market, the end user wants to know that that is a safe fixture, that it performs in a particular way, that it can be checked that it works in that particular kind of way. It gives confidence to the specification side of the business that, not to put too fine a point on it, second-hand light fittings are good for all of us. And I'm going to finish off with a little flow chart. This is one that you really need to get your head around. But I'm going to, 3 lines. The one at the top, the assessment. An old fitting is an old fitting. But how good an old fitting is it? Before any kind of work can be done on it, something needs to be decided as to whether it is worth or not worth doing some work with. If you decide that you're going to do something about it, then you go through processes which will have defined whether you are just basically reusing a fitting that didn't require any kind of input to make it a viable luminaire to go back into the marketplace, whether it's been reconditioned or remanufactured, and ultimately the stuff that you end up to recycle because there was nothing else you could do with it. And underneath all of that, a regulatory compliance to make sure that everybody is safe with that. That's me. That's what I wanted to talk about. That's where we're going with 8887, and no doubt you will be hearing lots from us over the coming months until we get something that we can all share with you. Thanks for your time, and let's have a panel discussion, everybody.
Thank you, John. And if I could invite everybody just to get your cameras and microphones on, and welcome to the full panel. Ruth, I'm going to come. You're still on mute, by the way, Ruth. If you could just,
sorry about that.
I'll come to you first. This time wearing your sort of Society of Light and Lighting hat, and I know you guys have worked hard to come out with guidance to help both specifiers and manufacturers, swim in this new world. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you guys have done?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Thanks, John and Simon, for fantastic, really thought-provoking stuff there. So the SLL have been working on a document that I know in previous Recolight webinars it's been discussed, but I'll just recap again as well. So it's called, the official title is TM66, which is Technical Memorandum 66, which is a rather dry title that doesn't really explain what it is. The title that I prefer to use is the document, which is Creating a Circular Economy in the Lighting Industry. And it is no less than a book about how to embrace the circular economy in lighting, which I think is brilliant because it was born out of the fact that that didn't exist at the time. Now, I know that other organizations have started to produce guidance, and it's great that the LIA have got something now as well. And obviously BS 8887 is coming along, which is brilliant, the new one. But essentially, this document is more of there's a bit more philosophy to it. It's certainly not a tick box document. It's there to explain the business case for adopting circular economy, whether you're a specifier or a manufacturer or an electrical wholesaler. There's a whole range of perspectives covered in there, which is really useful. It does have 2 accompanying tools, which are called the Circular Economy Assessment Method. So there's one which is, or CEAM for short, CEAM. There's CEAM Make, which is aimed at manufacturers, and then there's CEAM Design, which is aimed at specifiers. And those tools are there to help people effectively score a product and enable you to compare it. So, you know, this is obviously quite a complex topic. So what we're trying to do is create a framework for distilling something quite complex into some independent metrics that allow you to make more informed decisions, whether it's about your processes as a producer or about your you know, the products that you choose to specify. I mean, I think like all of this, we are at the very beginning, but this is a first step, and you know, we're expecting it to launch very, very soon. I don't want to say what date, but we are just dotting the I's and crossing the T's in the publication process. So, you know, it will be out. In fact, I might share a link with Susanna afterwards that she can share with the listeners as well.
Mm-hmm. And so presumably we're going to see, you know, manufacturers using the 1 to 4 on the metric, you know, on luminaires, and getting behind it and using that as a tool for marketing and for explaining how their products are compatible with the circular principles.
Yeah, that's the idea. But I think as with everything, you know, we've got to try this out and see how it works in the market and in the industry. But it's a really good framework for action, as it were. You know, that's really what we're trying to create here. I think there's a lot of people out there who want to do this, but they don't know where to start. And we want this document to be a thing that people can look at and start to get their heads around, you know, how to begin, really.
Okay. Yes, Simon.
I just wanted to ask Ruth, and it's sort of picking up on, I saw a question come in from Kevin as well, but I think CEAM has been produced primarily around specification of kind of new lighting. It feels as though it should also be applicable to any product that is being assessed for remanufacture. Is that potentially possible?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that would probably be the next step, you know, that we'd like to take. I suppose, like anything, there's this balance between wanting to get something out there and also wanting to make it as comprehensive as possible. But you're right, Simon. I think it's really important that we actually need to facilitate the reuse and remanufacture stream, instead of always assuming that everything is starting from scratch, because, you know, that's what we're trying to undo here, that culture of, you know, starting with a blank page and new materials, you know, from the word go. So, I mean, that's a really good, that's actually a really good pointer for us to develop in the next iteration. So yeah, thank you.
John, yeah, if I could bring you in, I was going to bring you in here, John, as the, you know, a representative of the largest lighting company in the world. So do you want to tell us what you guys are doing to gear up for this world of replaceability and circular luminaires?
Because to ask Ruth a very quick question, just to follow on from Simon's comment. Just want to think about this. Would you have that remanufacture as more of a self-certification? Because the reason for me asking that question is that it's going to be done by a lot of small independent companies. It would depend then, you know, would they have to put this through a separate independent testing? Is it something that they can just take a general sort of, I hate to use the word, but checklist of things that they need to do and achieve? and I know it's something you've only just been, the idea's only been just floated by you by Simon. Do you think that could be something that'd be useful if it became a self-certification?
Yeah, that's actually been discussed internally at SLL as well, that idea. So there's some complexities to it in terms of how we would administer it, but it's definitely something that has been considered. And I can't really say much more at this point, but I think, again, that's a really useful bit of feedback there for us to be able to try and incorporate. I guess the other thing is we don't want to start overlapping too much with existing frameworks like BS 8887, the kite mark that John talked about. We need to be careful that we're not trying to sort of reinvent the wheel if somebody else is already developing that. But yeah.
And I suppose one of the objectives would be to try and get it written into specifications as well for long-term circular plans from individual end users as well.
That would be brilliant, wouldn't it? Because that would protect, you know, that would really help us to protect the integrity of the whole thing, you know, and to not allow it to be undermined by substitution. You know, I'm trying not to say the words value engineering, but it's just coming out. Yeah.
I think this will get teased out as part of 8887 as well, and actually it's probably fair to say that the largest element of debate while we're trying to form what 8887 is around compliance, right? And what is, you know, how do you know, two scenarios, but you know, one end of the scale is, you know, maybe a couple of bulkheads in an underpass, right? And you know, swapping a gear tray out from compact fluorescent to LED. Can you apply the same compliance metrics to something that's 1,000 light fittings in 30 floors of an office block, right? So and part of the reason why John was saying actually this is a process, not a product standard, or it's probably will be defined as a process standard, not a product standard, is there'll be an element of risk assessment or whatever, however you want to term that, where you're going to make a judgment call as to what's appropriate to in terms of compliance and self-certification to apply to on a project by project basis.
Which kind of leads me on to that whole idea of writing specifications, and perhaps for a long way through the lifetime of the product, leads me into what Ray's question was about what we as Signify have been doing. So for the last 3 or 4 years, we've started to expand on a portfolio of you know, circular economy products, or products that are circular economy ready. And why do I say that? Well, essentially, you know, you can incorporate everything from modular design, easy to maintain, disassembly in only 5 parts with relatively simple tools, you know, upgradability, and that particularly means incorporation into controls, because controls is so important. But what the reality is you can do that, and you can make every single luminaire perfect for a circular economy proposition. But until you've actually got a situation where people are bought into it, then you won't have a circular economy. If I really dumb it down to something very simple, if you look at a sealed luminaire, a cheap sealed panel, that is a linear proposition, and that's that. If I look at a circular luminaire, then if you don't embrace the concept, if you don't have all the stakeholders, the end user, maybe the FM, if you haven't got a fixed contract, if you haven't brought into this with a contract or lighting as a service, where you would just be simply looking at the OPEX, not the CAPEX, because you effectively lease it, there is no control over it. At its highest point, you can actually get to the situation whereby, and this is what we do offer, we offer a contract. So you can go, say, for 10 years on a contract, which is easily doable with LED luminaires. And in fact, we'll both maintain it during the life cycle, and or you can have somebody come in and you can hire a third party. But obviously, it's better if we do the maintenance, because it's our product from start to finish. And at the end, you can actually have the reverse supply chain as well. But essentially, you know, if you don't have that engagement with the product end to end, you're running the risk of it just ending up being like any other product, because if it's not treated properly at the end of its life cycle, if it just goes into the into the landfill, or it just goes into just shredding and recycling, then that's not really the purpose of having spent all that time designing the luminaire. So that's what we try and do. And the offers that we make are very much based on education and getting that kind of partnership with all those different stakeholders within the lifetime of the product. It's really important as well that you talk to people about what the products can do for them. It's more than just simply energy saving at the front end. It's about using fewer resources. It's about companies playing their part. It's also about thinking about, if you incorporate it with controls, and it's so important in circular economy, in lighting at least, that you have controls involved, because that's when you get your maximum energy savings. And those energy savings, people don't appreciate, can be really beneficial in terms of the release of pressure you put on not just the national grid, but also on just simply individual installations. So if you have a big building, a big office complex, let's face it, for example, blocks of flats, how do you fit heat pumps in blocks of flats? Well, essentially, you need one big one for the entire complex. It can be at this stage that the infrastructure of the electrical design into those buildings actually can't cope with the additional electricity which is required for the heat pump. What you can do with a very low capex, very quick fix with LED is save enough electricity demand that you can actually then start to incorporate your EV charging points, your heat pumps, without having to spend extra money and incur more carbon footprint on the installation of that upgraded electricity system. That's what we try and talk to people about. That's why we say it's not just about this individual product, it's through life, and think about all the other benefits that can accrue. So that's what we're doing as a business at the moment.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah. Well, it's basically a holistic approach to the client, isn't it? That's what you're asking
holistic, about. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Michael, if I could bring you in here, you're because you guys are, one of the few companies that do. You sell luminaires and lamps, etc., and you also have a recycling business. And presumably, tell us a little bit about how those two work and how they dovetail together, and what's happening in North America in this area.
Well, the first thing I would say, most importantly, is there's a lot of reference to we're at the beginning of this, and I think the lighting industry was actually quite good at this prior to LED. So if you look at the recycling of fixtures that are non-LED, they are quite interoperable. I mean, GE's equipment works with the old Philips equipment, works with Sylvania's equipment. And so this equipment was very interoperable, all the ballasts, all the sockets, all the lamps, everything across. So the lighting industry was very good at this until we got into the race to lumens per watt and to increase the lifetime of the light source rather than the life cycle of the light fixture. So what the lighting industry has done is shortened the life cycle of a fixture, but increased the life of the light source. But that shortens the life by at least 70 or 80%. So if you were recycling an old fluorescent light fixture, it'd be 40, 50, 60 years old. And it could have gone through T12, T8, T5, and then had LED tubes in it. You buy a fixture today, an LED light fixture, maximum life on that thing, and I don't care what anyone says about 100,000 hours, we're already recycling tons of LED luminaires. And the problem with them is there's no mechanical form factors. We have no idea what we're going to get. We just put them in a bin and send them for electronics recycling. Whereas older fluorescent and HID luminaires had tons of end of life value. So that fixture comes back. We don't charge the person to recycle the fixture. We charge them to recycle the lamp, but we pay them for the old fixture because the value of the aluminum and the copper and all this stuff in the fixture is incredible. It's like 20 bucks a fixture, whatever, 9 pounds or 7 pounds. And so we can actually dismantle that fixture, separate the aluminum and the copper and the metal, and get lots of money from it. So I think one of the things that concerns me here is this idea that we're at the beginning. I think we have to look what the lighting industry used to do maybe 20, 30 years ago, creating standard mechanical form factors, creating ANSI codes on lamps, and then having interoperability across manufacturers. And finally, my point would be somehow, and I know Nigel and I discussed this before, somehow embedding end of life value into these things, whether that's through repair or reuse, or whether that's somehow like a deposit system where people have a reason to take that fixture apart, look at the components inside it, and either send it for proper aluminum recycling where it can be turned into a new bigot of aluminum or spigot or whatever you call those things, or it can be reused in some manner. And I think for me, looking at a company that dismantles old light fixtures all the time, LED light fixtures are just e-waste. They're nothing different than a laptop or a TV. Yep. And I think if the lighting industry can focus on somehow cooperating, the manufacturers cooperating and making those mechanical form factors like a Jaga consortium or something like that, you would see an extension of the life cycle of the fixture, which I think is the most important thing. And then embedding end of life value when it needs to be thrown out. It doesn't cost anybody anything. There's actually money, and you're able to recover some money from it. So those would be my major thoughts from where I'm at waste aversion and then lighting solutions and that. So those are my thoughts.
Well, I tell you what, Michael, you've raised a very thorny issue, which is about interoperability and standardization of connectors and all that, which is, in theory, everybody's in favor of, but in practice, nobody wants to do. Zoltan, if I could bring you in on this, the lighting industry, it's not really in a manufacturer's interest to have, a luminaire that can be replaced with a generic, componentry, maybe made from Asia. They've lost control of their luminaire, haven't they? Despite what the legislation says.
Yeah, well, that's not necessarily true. I would say that the industry is still interested for the interoperability and standardization, harmonization. That's always, on our flag when we talk to policymakers on new legislation and try to drive them to directions that are more favorable for the entire market. So yes, I mean, what Michael has also mentioned, that the Zaga consortium and other private standards are helping the industry in that direction. And of course, it's all of our interest. I mean, whenever we come to the point, and I'm very happy to see that there's very much the great ideas coming together and trying to shape in the structure so that we manufacturers can really see that as a guide on how to start. I mean, we are pretty much at the beginning of this journey. Let's say it's really the big learning curve where we start to experience. We learn from each other. We learn from the other market players. We learn from the end consumer to know how we can perform better from their perspective. We can take our own personal examples from our home, our family experience, right? And we try to form that back into our design, to pick the right type of materials, to use each other's parts and components. Not a big secret. The big manufacturers are using each other's main components. I think there are a limited number of LED chip makers around the world. Drivers are also limited to certain manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So, this already gives a little bit of interchangeability, but we can elaborate that further. And then when it comes to refurbishment or reuse, it makes our life much easier. I think the main question is really like, I think Simon, you said that it is more a process question than a product. Who does what and at which point, and who takes the responsibility, the liability of releasing refurbished or reconditioned goods back in the market? Who's going to stand for the integrity of the product? And then, of course, as manufacturers and third parties can provide supply of parts and components, but who's going to control quality and reliability of those parts and components? So these are the main questions that we as manufacturer have in mind. And as I said, we are pretty much at the beginning of the learning curve. And of course, we always keep an eye on the shaping regulations there, which can give us an outlook to the next 3 to 5 years. And I know in the previous webinars, Rania Georgotsakou from Lighting Europe Secretariat had outlined in more details of what is expected. For example, the Sustainable Product Initiative of the EU is bringing us a chance to sort of measure the circularity of products, or at least to give an idea to the end consumer and the entire market of how products expected to perform in this new concept, because this is a new concept, so the whole market has to learn about it. So We started to walk from the linear to the circular economy, but like I said, this is a long journey. So we all have to grasp a certain part of it, and then, you know, to work out the network, to work out the connections, and work out who does what. So basically, a line of responsibilities.
Okay, Simon, did you want to come in on this?
I think we can work out the process. I think the you know, and it may take a bit of time, and of course the industry will do what it will do in the meantime. But the bigger challenge for me is that as an industry, as a manufacturing industry, we've driven down a one-way street with regards to cost and efficacy, and you know, it's not even a cul-de-sac, right? Because there isn't a turning circle at the back end, right? There isn't a turning circle. So, and what we just realized is that actually the car we're driving hasn't even got a reverse, right? So you know, we're in a scenario where, and you know, I can see some questions coming up in the chat around you know, cost, right? We're in a cost play here where we've driven really hard down in one direction to reduce cost, and we're talking about introducing measures and introducing legislation and processes that almost certainly will introduce cost, right, into this process. And that, for me, that's going to be amongst the bigger challenges, is educating the benefits and you know, of going down a process where a cost model is higher than the one that we've become very accustomed to. And Ruth was also on a really interesting webinar just earlier this week. It was an SLL webinar where we had stakeholders across the whole education system, including installers and facilities managers within education environments. And it was fascinating to get points of view with regards to lighting across not just specifiers and manufacturers, but across installers and users as well. And you know, the differences in opinion were quite stark, right, Ruth?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You know, there were quite stark differences, and you know, what really struck me was that, you know, there was a guy that was operating a school, and he was like, I don't want a product that lasts 20 years, right? Why do I need a product? I'm actually inhibiting my ability to take advantage of better technology if I've got a product that's lasting for 20 years. And he said, and why would I want to buy a product that's more expensive? I just throw it away and get another one in, throw another one in, right? So, you know, it was fascinating for me anyway to hear that perspective and try and work out as a designer how I do something about that. How do I make a more expensive, more sustainable solution attractive to an end user like that?
Yeah, could I just come in there? That was a particularly interesting one, wasn't it? That the head teacher who essentially purchased a load of LED panels, cheap LED panels, we think, we don't know for sure. You know, these are people who've got limited, they've got, you know, it's a school, they haven't, and in this case, this school actually catered for hearing impaired children as well as mainstream education. So it turns out vertical illumination is really important there, because nonverbal communication is even more important than it is typically in a school. And he wanted lots of light, and he found that panels gave him that. So he just bought a whole load of them and put them in. And he didn't seek any advice from a lighting consultant in order to do that. He just got on and did it, and he's quite happy with the results. And, you know, we talked to him, you know, quite gently, I think, about his thought process around the content of that fitting, and the fact that it's a panel that's not, you know, disassemblable and can be, you know, it's going to go to landfill or whatever. And, you know, as Simon said, one of his thoughts was around technology and keeping up with technology. And so, you know, that does bring us back to this whole thing about obsolescence, and the fact that, I mean, it chimes with what Michael was saying. It's like if LED fittings that are fully closed item, it is like a piece of electronic equipment, and it has the same issues around obsolescence. So people buy something and they think, will this still be current in 2 years? Because in 2 years, there'll probably be a new version of this. So maybe they actually don't particularly care about how long it lasts, because they're going to care more about getting the more energy efficient version of it later. So, you know, we're battling with all of this. And I do think that, you know, we're here talking, you know, we're here in a Recolight webinar. We care about light, and we're talking about how all of this applies to lighting. But then we need to be also talking to people who, for whom light is just one thing. They don't think about lighting all the time. They're thinking about all kinds of stuff that they need to replace, whether it's in a school or, you know, any kind of building. They're caring about how much it's going to cost them and what they're going to get at the end of it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we are battling with all of this. And I agree with Michael that LED does not help us here, because it has turned lighting into electronic equipment, and brings with it all of those issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right, we'll throw this out to a few questions. Oh, sorry, John, if you want to come in quickly.
I think what to summarize that, LED in some cases has devalued lighting, and that's the problem. And it's taken away people's understanding of what you can do with lighting and the quality, good quality lighting. I like, Michael, what you were saying before, because it very much occurs to me that we did have an environment where you could upgrade in the past, and we've actually done quite a lot of upgrades ourselves, actually using LED gear trays and so on. But that's Ruth, we're at this transitional point. It is the start of the second wave of lighting, effectively, or the third wave, actually, forgive me, because traditional platforms was the first. Then you had almost the race to the bottom in many cases, and then you've got this third wave now. We have a different environment, though. We are now talking about, obviously, that headmaster may have special, and you said there were special reasons around that school as well, that the lighting appealed to him. Not much money, move on, job done. However, we are at a place now where the movement to deal with the climate emergency and also wider environmental issues has never been higher on the agenda than it is now. People are going to become much more conscious about it. So that opportunity to do that education piece that I was talking about earlier, this is now starting to come to the fore. So I you know, whilst it is a bit frustrating when you see these situations at my own kids' school, that both left school, gone to university, but my own kids' school, there was a similar sort of situation. They spent a lot, or they did a lot of refurb to LED, and oh boy, did it really illuminate the space. It was painful to sit in the space, and that was the point. And the reality is that this is all part of the transition, but my point really is about this whole holistic approaches that we're at a point now, I believe, where education, quality, and if you then go back to selling systems and services, so perhaps you don't have to have that CapEx as well. These are all opportunities to have much more engaged, relevant and intelligent conversations with people. And I do think that the coming years are going to see us move away from these challenges that we've got of everybody wanting the cheapest.
Okay, I'll just take Michael briefly, and then we'll throw out some questions.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make the point that for the first time, what's emerging is we're actually seeing environmental interests competing with one another, right? So you have like, the societal benefits of reduced energy consumption, but then you've increased the amount of waste. And so you don't want to, use up landfill. So for the first time, what we're parsing out a lot of times is competing interests for environmental interests, which is completely new. In the past, there was only, in the lighting business, it was all about energy efficiency. And that's starting to change, especially with, the cost of shipping things from China to North America or to Europe, and embedding all of these what was once externalities now being calculated. It makes the picture very complicated. And on top of that, you have health effects, you have dark sky issues. There's a lot of competing interests in this field that we, as an industry, we really need to parse out before we start slamming regulations too hard, because we may make another mistake. Like we made the dark sky issue a lot worse with LED than it was before. And so we want to make sure that we understand what all the environmental issues are, and then along with that, what the lighting issues are. And so if we craft policy, we're crafting very wise and smart policy moving forward, so that we're checking all these boxes, right? And I think that we're just starting to learn what all those competing interests are, and they all have value.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Michael. And a couple of specific questions on diffusers and plastics and diffusers and optics and lenses. And Nick Round of ALP Europe and Mike Edwards saying that, you know, diffusers and lens, you know, manufacturers want virgin materials for those products, because if you use recycled, there's a big deterioration in efficacy. So Simon, what would you advise a client who's saying, look, you know, I need to use the virgin stuff for these components?
The answer is yes. Right. So there's some fruit that hangs lower than others, you know, and the need to have as high efficacy as possible is you know, perfectly valid. In those scenarios, you're going to use virgin material. It doesn't mean at the end of that virgin material life, you then can't use that to create other things that are maybe not optical, for instance.
Right. Just not to forget that there are still new processes coming along, and companies like Viridor are investing in the chemical reclamation of plastics, which actually reduces them down to a molecular level and puts them back together again in a virgin state. So at the same time, that, yeah, I mean, they're absolutely right. You can't really compromise on the quality of your plastic, but we can look forward to a better way of bringing old plastics back into use, and that's something we mustn't forget, that there are possible technological solutions out there. Not all the time, but that might be one that works for us.
Okay. Nigel. Oh, sorry, Nigel.
Just to add that actually there's a realistic possibility that standards will be adopted, or regulations will be adopted that will encourage or even require a certain proportion of recycled plastic content to be incorporated into new products. And so anybody who is getting into that and is starting to take a look into it and implementing it now is likely to have an advantage in the future, because it does have the potential to reduce regulatory costs.
Nigel, here's a question I think it would be directed to you, which is Heidi DeLucchi saying, as we know, there's a large section of manufacturers who import luminaires, which are essentially disposable. Long term, will there be legislation that will ensure that all luminaires placed in the market need to conform to the circular economy standards ethos? And a lot of these will be online sales, I presume, as well.
Undoubtedly, the government has said they want to embrace circular economy principles, and so there's a realistic chance that that will start to be implemented. And we've already heard about the requirements for replaceability. That will become law, and that does start to drive a more circular approach. But it's always going to be very difficult, because there are some online suppliers and that will continue regardless of any standards and legislation that exists.
Simon, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah. So I think the if we look at Ecodesign, then it's very definitely trying to move the industry towards repairability and replaceability. It's a necessary evil at the moment. There are also icons that say nothing is replaceable in this product, and that's your kind of to be slightly controversial, that's your get out of jail free card. But what that really then does is to ask me to ask the question of the specification community, is then that have this label on, right, and actually try and drive the agenda through specification. And I know lighting design is 10% of overall lighting sort of supply and purchase and procurement, but it's play a part to drive it towards the replaceability end of Ecodesign.
Yeah, Ruth, you're the lighting design representative on the panel.
Lucky me. I think
yeah, lucky you. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think that the other thing that occurs to me is about the business case here, and I think as more clients will actually want this because they want that, because they care, and also cynically because it's good for their business. So they will want the products to to be, you know, they'll want everything in the building to be something that's been specified with the circular economy in mind. And things like lighting as a service will also, I think, really come into play as well, because it does lend itself to that very neatly in a way that other processes might find it quite complex.
So you think, so you're saying clients will pay the premium, basically? Sorry.
I think some clients, I'm not going to be naive about this, there will be some clients for whom it's just the same old, you know, what can I get for the least amount of money conversation. But we're seeing this paralleled with other, in other sort of disciplines or in other ways across the design community. So, you know, it's becoming a lot more commonplace that clients want their building to be, you know, net zero, and they want, you know, they want the systems to be designed with that in mind. Often there is a driver of certification such as WELL or BREEAM, but ultimately, you know, it's whether it's driven by a genuine need or because it's a business, good for business, it's there, and it's a real trend that's happening. So I would like to think that it will translate into the same kind of process when it comes to thinking about the equipment that's going in. I mean, we already undertake a huge amount of embodied carbon assessments, and you know, that's becoming more and more commonplace. But I am aware that, you know, I work for a large organization, and so the clients that we're working with are you know, maybe have that privilege, and there might be lots of smaller clients for whom, you know, it's a much more difficult path for them. Obviously, when the legislation is there, then it won't be a choice anymore. It will be something that should be inherent. But I mean, it kind of, there's one more thing that had occurred to me earlier that I might as well mention now. You know, this conversation about the additional cost associated with this. And I think it was Simon that mentioned it will add cost. You know, these steps will have to inevitably, or they could add cost to the bottom line of products. And I was listening to the conversation between Andrew Bissell and Christopher Kaiba, I think it was yesterday, and that was primarily about dark skies. But Christopher Kaiba made a point, which is, you know, maybe light is too cheap, you know, and that's why we've got these problems. So, you know, there is an argument there that says it should be more expensive because we need to think about it. When it's cheap, that's when we don't think about it. So, you know, there maybe there's something in that. I don't know what the other panelists think.
John?
Yeah, I fully agree. You know, it's when you've given something away, there's no value in it, and people don't appreciate it. Luminaires are too cheap in some cases, and that what you can or not pay for a luminaire nowadays is extraordinary. You know, but all you do is kick the problem down the road. The cost is picked up somewhere else. It's picked up for the environment. It's picked up because you're wasting, you know, and resources to recycle it if you're lucky, or if it's not recycled properly. And also, if you look at things like, I don't know, clothes manufacturers and retailers who sell incredibly cheap clothes, we all know that where the real cost of that is being paid. It's being paid back at the source of production, the people who are making the clothes. And again, I come back to this thing about, and it's exactly what you've been saying, Ruth, about the world is changing. People are changing their attitudes to things, and I think now is the time when people will be more open to listening to the arguments as to why they should pay a little bit more for their lighting, because it's going to offer so much more for them and their businesses and employees as well. It's absolutely correct. Employees want to work for responsible employers. So if I think about the pressure at our own place at Signify in the UK to switch the company car fleet, mostly for field salespeople, over to electric vehicles was huge. That was not something that the company promoted. It was actually something which was positively put forward at suggestion times and conferences by the staff who want to be driving electric vehicles, for example. And it's really important to people that we are seen to live up to the credentials of our, you know, our net carbon zero. That's not something which is just a tagline for us. It's something that we really appreciate and we live up to. And I think other companies want to follow suit. You know, people want to know that their companies are buying renewable electricity, for example. And it's true, the time now is right to start talking about the products which will be better for everybody. Stop kicking the can down the road back to those people who are least able to defend themselves against the additional costs and going back to the place where the source of production are and so on. And people will appreciate and understand why they're investing in something which is more than just something that stops you from walking into a wall when the sun goes down.
Donald Kennedy is asking, you know, he's specifically bringing up the point of view, is there any specifics on the luminaire cost impact that the forthcoming legislation will have? And presumably making a product that ticks all these boxes that we're talking about today, there is a significant premium on designing a product like that, isn't there, Zoltan?
Yeah, well, you know, I remember at a time about a decade ago when incandescent lamps were about to cease from the market, and everybody was very much upset in the market of paying 10 times more for a CFLI bulb. And now CFLI bulbs are just phased out, right? And then LEDification takes place. So I think there's always a longer timeline to look at the return on investment. And, you know, it's very short-sighted look on the actual investment is not necessarily bringing the result that that would be desired here. So I think it is how we communicate all the efforts and all the benefits to the market, and then how we can be convincing enough to take that one-time investment into the high-quality products. So,
yeah, I think that yeah, if we look at the introduction of Ecodesign, then I think there's two phases to this. There probably is going to be, I mean, this is a specific comment around cost. There probably is a stage where manufacturers are going to look at products that inherently have not been designed for circularity and have not been designed for remanufacture. And it's going to be a painful process to get those to a position at which they are more circular and more sustainable and more able to be reused. The bit that's going to be really interesting as we move forward is if you're designing fixtures now for circularity and for reuse, then actually I don't see a reason why there should be a need for those to be more expensive per se in the future. You know, there's one argument about actually should lighting be more expensive anyway, right? And is there more value in lighting? And I, you know, I would argue that there is, and that's quite an interesting observation from someone that doesn't sell light fittings, right? So you know, but there's no reason why good design in the future, good circular design in the future, should cost more than it does today.
What do you say to an SME who sits, you know, I mean, you have some medium-sized clients who say, well, where's the incentive for me to come? Maybe I might have a hero fitting that is in, you know, all over my website, but where's the incentive for me to re-engineer my current fittings, to have good connections, to have demountability, to have used recycled aluminium, all the rest of it, to add a 50% premium on it? Where's my incentive to do that when my competitors are not pressured to do that? They can use the opt-outs, they can use the technical justification and all the rest of it. And the clients are not exactly saying, oh, please, I'd love to pay a 50% premium on my light fittings. Yeah. So it's difficult, isn't it?
The human race is not instinctively great at putting their hand up and volunteering to do more than or paying more than they have to, right? So, and I think we're probably, as Michael alluded to earlier, we've probably never been in a better situation to find a path to embrace this, but it still isn't going to be an easy journey.
Any more views on that, Michael?
I think Nigel and I discussed this, where regulation versus innovation or entrepreneurship or whatever, and there's like a balance between those two of what you can do. I would like to see if we could find a way to embed end of life value, regardless as to whether it can be reused or not, so that somehow we start like as a beginning. I mean, Simon was talking about the car going down the one-way street with no brakes, no reverse, and it's not a cul-de-sac, right? It's a cliff. I think that's a great metaphor. If we could find a way to embed end of life value into these products, even if it's like a deposit system, so that somehow these products are going back to somewhere that people are looking at them and saying, can we recycle this? And right now we're making luminaires that have negative value at end of life. They cost money for you to get rid of them. And it's the same issue, Nigel, we discussed about mercury containing lamps. It's the same problem, essentially, is that, and not only that, but it's also, low level hazardous waste. So if we could, as an industry, figure out a way, even if it was $20 or 10 pounds, or whatever it is, to find a way that it's worth it for somebody to take this somewhere and give it to the repair shop that someone was talking about, and then maybe somebody has an opportunity to fix it. I think that would balance the regulatory side so that people were then financially motivated to do something with old lighting equipment. And I don't know how we would do that, but if we could find a way to, as a deposit system or something that you pay at the front, you pay a $20 deposit, and when a luminaire is returned, then that luminaire is handed to a scrapyard or the repair shop or whatever, where someone can do something with it. I think that would be a good balance to those regulations that we're doing as a starting point.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right, Michael, that in many instances, actually deposit return systems are actually can be quite effective. They tend to be more effective, though, when there was a fairly short window between purchase and waste arising. And so, for example, in the UK, within the next 18 months or 2 years or so, it's likely we'll have a deposit return system for plastic bottles that we purchase and drink from on the go, and there will be a deposit of 10p, 20p, whatever it is, so that to encourage you to immediately return it to the retailer, and that keeps it in the system and stops it becoming waste. The longer the lifetime of the product, the harder it is to administer that deposit return. And so in some ways, I think the idea of lighting as a service, where the original manufacturer still has an interest in that product when it reaches end of life 10 years later, is perhaps a better way of recognizing that, because it also means that the fittings can then be returned to possibly the best organization that is in the ideal position to then be able to refurbish them, upgrade them, and give them a second life. So that may be the best way of giving them end of life value. And certainly what we've got to do is it's a complete mindset change. It's a mindset change, not just in the lighting industry, but it's across everything we do, that actually reuse is better than new, life extension is better than replacement. And, that head teacher who was talking about, I'll just chuck it away and buy a new one, was doing nothing more than reflecting what he or she probably does in their personal life as well. And it's that mindset change that's got to change at home, but at work as well. Sorry, John, I think you wanted to come in. John.
Yeah, it's kind of a question for you there, Nigel. Do you see some sort of possibility of then bringing other industries together, other products together? Because Ruth's absolutely right, that period of, say, 10 years from when you paid your deposit to getting it back, that's a long time for people to have to wait. But if you then started to have other industries involved with it, and I'm trying to think of something, maybe some of the other things like, I don't know, coffee machines, cleaning products that don't last as long, for example, hoovers and so on. If there was some kind of tie-up for all of industry operated by organizations, maybe like Recolight or someone who specializes just in this one area, do you see that as being something that could be organized, that all industries could get involved with it, so that you'd then have a cadence where you were regularly getting deposits back, for example, and it wasn't just you waiting for that one industry, lighting in this case, to pay back?
It's a really tough one, because deposit return has been attempted in one or two markets for electrical products, and they are just very complicated, because you have to start tracking who's paid a deposit, have they got a receipt to prove it, do they still have the receipt when they bring the product back 5-10 years later, and the mechanics of actually tracking through the numbers become extraordinarily difficult. So to me, I would still see that there are perhaps other ways that might be more effective at stimulating and encouraging reuse, other regulatory approaches, other standards that are likely to be more successful than simply attaching, you know, a tenner to a product, which will then magically reappear 10 years later.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Matt Free is echoing the sort of points that you, John, you and Michael have said about. He's saying that although the initial cost of a luminaire designed with circular economy principles may be more, the upgrade path at end of life is less than purchasing another replacement cheap luminaire, and we need to educate the industry through initial specification. So basically saying, you know, your client's paying a premium now, but they'll benefit down the road. John.
Yeah, something to, I think maybe to remember is that we've always had maintenance companies, and it used to be their job to take out old fluorescent tubes and put new fluorescent tubes in. Perhaps they reimagine themselves as being basically the keepers of the electrical and mechanical estate. They're not lighting people, but they've got lighting people. But they will also be looking at mechanical plant to make sure that the pumps are working properly. And it's in their interest to make sure that you can change a part rather than change an entire fitting, because that could be part of their contract with their client. So that's just a way of saying there are versions of what we're talking about already happening. Yeah.
I'd like to say that to Nigel's point on lighting as a service, you know, I think it's a part. I think lighting as a service can be a part of the solution. But that's going to be, you know, you're going to have tons of SMEs, like you said, that are just not interested in a long-term relationship with the manufacturer. And, you know, I think it was Simon who was working in the radio repair shop. You know, that place didn't manufacture TVs, you know, and so they were a part of it as well. And so instead of, you know, trying to press one solution, I think we need multiple different angles where, you know, where we can, you know, there's lighting as a service, maybe for, you know, large chains of stores that really works well for, but, you know, it doesn't work well for a factory or whatever. And so you have these repair shops that are in the mix as well, with the skills of like what John was talking about, where they're multifaceted, they can fix lots of different things. And I think we need to find a way to reignite that part of our economy, which we seem to have lost in the last 20 or 30 years. You can't even buy parts anymore, sockets and stuff like that. You can't even buy these things. So we need to, you know, allow that emergence alongside lighting as a service and other solutions that then take that 100, you know, get to that 90 or 95% of the market allowed to be circular. So I don't think there's one solution, but many.
It's interesting to note that I think it's in France where organizations like Recolight, you know, we schemes are actually now required to provide finance to repair shops to help them provide a repair service to end users. I think that's a fantastic idea. And it's one of the ways in which, you know, Simon's shop might have a real second life and, you know, really you know, come back into fruition again.
Okay, Ruth, briefly, as we're coming up to the bottom of the half hour. Yeah.
I was just going to chip in there about the conversation about repair shops, and I think one of the things that occurred to me when Simon was talking about that earlier on was, why is it that those businesses are gone? And it's because that business model wasn't stacking up anymore. And, you know, we have to delve into that and understand why it became unfeasible as a business model. And then we need to we now have a fantastic opportunity, as Michael and Nigel have said, to create a new part of our economy, or reignite that part of our economy. You know, and maybe it does have to include systems that can support those businesses, such as the one that Nigel just mentioned, you know, almost an artificial support just to get things started. But, you know, we absolutely need to. And I think there is a huge demand for this. And, you know, just in the consumer end, you know, John Bullock was talking on social media earlier this week about repair cafes. And, you know, that's a cultural movement that's happened. It's very much community based. You know, I'd like to think that would also be reflected, you know, in bigger organizations you know, if they in their personal lives, if people are shifting towards that mindset, then surely they can apply the same principle when they're developing a building. So yeah, we could be quite hopeful on a good day that we've got an opportunity. A lot of this gives us an opportunity to create a new economy.
John, just super brief, and then I'll wrap up.
Super brief. Just a thought about the repair shops. Maybe it's because in the past, TVs back in the 50s, 60s, 70s were super unreliable. So they were always breaking down. Yeah. So when people would be welcoming anything that was new, when transistors came in, television suddenly became a lot more reliable. Products today are much more reliable. Many LEDs, you know, luminaires, they last a very long time anyway. So there is a scope to bring back repair, because people won't be resentful that they're forever having to have the repair guy around. It'll be a much rarer occasion. But if it's everything has to be repaired, then there will still be a business model for the new version of repair shops.
Okay, good stuff, John. Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists, John, Nigel, Zoltan, Simon, Michael, Ruth, and for Suzanne in the background and taking care of business. As you can see, there's loads to unpack in this area. There's loads of, we could have a webinar, we could have 20 webinars on each individual aspect of things that we were raised today. There was lots of questions. We couldn't get through all of them, unfortunately. However, I think in December some of these topics we'll drill into in more detail. I think that's going to be crucial. So please watch this space and just stay tuned. There is a recording of this. It will go up in about 24 hours, and you should get a link to it. So you can dive in there and see it again. Thank you also to our two presenters, Simon and John. Okay, thank you guys, and we'll see you again in 2022. Look forward to it.
And can I just say, this is the last of 6 webinars this year. I think 6 last year as well. And I'm so grateful to all our 40 or more panelists who've been on all those webinars, been really generous in sharing their knowledge, their expertise, and their thoughts. And in particular, thanks to Ray, you have done a stunning job, Ray, of keeping the whole thing together. Asking the questions, coming up with the with some of the ideas for many of the webinars. You've been fantastic, and we really thank you from the bottom of our heart at Recolight.
Yeah. Some panels are easier than others, but this one's been a great one. So thank you, guys.
And thanks to all who've been listening. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks.
All right.